If you're in this class, please come and sit in front of the horizontal aisle here. How many of you have used something called Top Hat software in one of your classes? Any of you? Yeah, one, two. How did you like it compared to Blackboard? Anything's better than Blackboard. Okay, let's move. Actually, one of you did a very convincing case study of Blackboard software, saying how excellent and flawless it was, and your argument was very coherent, and so you did very well on it, even though I completely disagree with your assessment. But here's the thing, this Top Hat thing has something that struck me as a modest red flag for students. I mean, you guys obviously have to buy books, you have to buy things all the time, but the student has to pay like a $20 fee to use Top Hat for the year. And if my course were the only one that you took with it, that I would think as a student that would be kind of a pain, given that you're paying several multiples of $20 a year to go to school here. Yeah. By the way, speaking of which, our university president, Joseph Aoun, will be our final guest on Monday. Looking forward to it. Just as a little preview, we're going to talk about two primary things. We're going to just go right into the interview portion with President Aoun. And we're going to talk about innovation in higher education. Not surprisingly, that's the business he's in. And he's quite well known for being a real innovator at this university with a lot of different things. So we'll talk about that. And then also, we'll talk about his role as a client for the architects that we talked with a few weeks ago in the design of the interdisciplinary engineering research building. Because as we know, that's a pretty unusual building. It's not just an average lab building or an average office building. I think we will be able to find out a lot about that process by talking with the president, because the president was extremely engaged with that design process. Come on in. Okay, let me generate our code here. Sorry, I know that's always the most important feature of this course is, by the way, that's true in a lot of things, is just showing up, as Woody Allen famously said, it accounts for like 90% of life. So, excuse me, sir, in the back, come on up. Come on up, it's okay. Okay, so the code is 6662. Ominously, 6662. Maybe you have, in fact, entered the lower depths of hell in this class, I don't know. 6662. Something like, I don't know if all the students are familiar with that because it might be a kind of a Western thing, but the number 666 often connotes the devil or Lucifer. So there's that. Okay, so as promised, today's episode of Understanding Design involves not so much me, but more of you. So I sent out an email a few minutes ago to Teresa Hoke, Jane Imperato, John Brooks, and Josie Sorbonne. Are you guys here? Yes, okay. Well, why don't all four of you come up, and we'll let you present your bits, and then we'll sit down and talk about it and engage with the class about not just these presentations, but I think this is an opportunity today for us to reflect a little bit about what I hope has been a body of knowledge that will be useful to you moving forward. That's certainly my hope. It's obviously not a course where you're taking home tons of new facts, okay? Instead, I hope it's a course where you are learning to look at the world and problem solving through a different lens than you did before you came into it. That's the hope. And the feedback I get from students who took this course a year ago, 2 years ago, I think this is the third year we've offered it, is very much that is the case. That it gives them a completely different lens, especially when they begin their careers, towards looking at problem solving in a creative way in a professional environment. So I'm hopeful, obviously, that this course will play some role like that in your life. But the four of you, why don't you come on up? I saw some hands, I know some of you, okay. 1, 2, 3, and where's the fourth? We have, so Teresa, Jane, John, and Josie. Which one? Well, I'll find. So John, Jane, Teresa. So Josie Sorbonne. Does anybody know Josie? No? Okay. Well, we'll have to remind her when I hope she comes in. I hope she's not coming because she's terrified of presenting. That's not a good thing. Okay. So I think we will start with the Strava presentation, which is you. Okay, Teresa. So let's do this. Let me just. Do you want to do the desktop designer thing? No, I don't think we need to do that today. But we'll just videotape the whole enterprise as opposed to that. By the way, I'm a user of Strava, very occasionally. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'd be sort of afraid if people followed me on it because it would be like, oh, he's bicycling again. Oh, it's like about every 5 weeks. Okay. Have we toggled this up there? Yeah, okay. So, Teresa, you're on. I guess why don't the rest of us will just sit at the table? I don't. I don't know that I have the app on this computer.
It's like a website.
Oh, okay. You can do that. Sure. And try to, keep it to like 10 minutes. Okay. This is always a little bit of a challenge. We need an app for view. They've invented projectors that can project from practically right on the wall. Yeah. They should create some goggles like this for when you're sitting too close. By the way, there were lots of very good options. I selected 4 that I thought were very coherent, but many of you did an extremely good job, so please don't take this to mean that these are the only 4 good ones, because that's not the case at all. Okay, you're on.
Okay. Does anybody use Strava? Anybody know what that is? Hey, okay, cool. So Strava is a running app that I use decently frequently. I picked this because my brother actually works for the company, so I got a little bit of insight. So basically what makes Strava different, well, I guess I'll just start with the PowerPoint. Yeah, so the word Strava in Swedish means to strive, and that's where the name of the company comes from. This is a quote from one of the CEOs. Okay, so this is a rower. And he trains all year for one season of competition, which will consist of 6 to 7 minute races. And so winning is one of his motivations. The rest of the year, he relies on his teammates who motivate him to train ridiculously hard. His team is another great source of motivation. When college ends, he will no longer have his team. What will motivate him? So these are a little motivation bubbles. So this rower's name is Michael, and he is one of the founders. He's the founder of Strava that had the quote on the board earlier, and he created Strava in order to recreate this team-like motivation to inspire athletes who are training by themselves to strive for their best. So starting out with the problem with empathy, why they created this. So athletes everywhere are motivated by 2 sources, competition and teammates, like we saw earlier. And so when high school and college are over, many people lose the teammates along with their motivation to strive for their best. And the company really wanted to empathize with people on to really bring like that source of motivation back. So how do we recreate team mentality? and how do we motivate people to stay active. So Thrower, along with his team of 6, worked to define this problem, to recreate the feeling of training with friends, motivate people to reach new heights, make capturing workout data simple and fast so you're not inputting it into your phone for too long. And then in 1996, they started ideating. They met with web developers to kind of discuss what they wanted to do with this app. They wanted to incorporate GPS technology. They wanted like a self-quantifying site, so that's where you like input your data about your runs. And also they wanted to add a social networking aspect to it, because that's how they would create their team, structure. But sadly, the technology of 1996 wasn't up for the challenge. GPS wasn't where it needed to be. Social media was just being introduced. Instead, the CEO created Cana Software, which was his first company. And this was a technology that companies all over the world use to take cell phone data and upload it to an online site, which we do every day when we type in Facebook posts on our phones, and it just goes to Facebook. So this company was first prototyped in 96, went public in 99, and by 2005, Harvath and his other teammates sold the company because they were kind of done. So back to the drawing board. They decided to pick up the Strava project again after the Nike Plus platform came out, and after Garmin GPS, the Garmin watches people run with, started really becoming more popular. And so that's when they started Strava. And at first, Strava was not an app. It was just like a website where you would like sync your Garmin watch to the website, and that would take your stats that way. So I created the first prototype, and it was online. It was a social media platform. And when I say this, it's not quite like just like Facebook, where you see other people's runs and it's your run. It really has that team aspect. I couldn't really put this in the PowerPoint without bringing up my whole app. But basically, you have people follow you, and you follow people, and you can see their runs, but you also can compete against these people in your runs. There are segments all around Boston. So I encourage you guys to download this app. If you do it, you're gonna see little highlighted routes all throughout Boston, and these are called segments. And what they are is anybody can run these segments, and your times get almost like a video game. There's like a leaderboard with your times on how you run. You can run or bike. And so you sort of have this competitive aspect of it with your teammates, and you try to have the fastest time on the segment. You try to keep improving, so you're competing against your own times and the times of your friends and the times of anyone in Boston. Your times are public for anyone to see if you choose. So that's what I mean when I say the social media aspect. Not many other apps offer that. And then by sharing this first Strava prototype with friends and family, that's how Strava's original user base was created. They didn't really publicly advertise. They kind of just word of mouth, it spread. And that seemed to work really well because runners and cyclists in general are like close-knit communities. So hey, I tried this app, really worked for me. Why don't you give it a try? And that really seemed to work for them. So testing and modifying. Through word of mouth, Strava continued to grow. With the release of the mobile app, this increased their user base by 160%. And this is when I really joined, because I don't have a Garmin watch. I run with my phone. And this makes it really easy because I just turn on the app, I press the record button, I do my workout. When I'm done my workout, I stop recording, and all my stats are up there. It gives me my mile splits. It gives me what segments I ran. Did I beat any of my own high scores? Did I beat anybody that I followed high scores? How many feet of elevations did I climb? And all these really great stats. And then the testing strategy they used to keep it in a constant state of improvement. This is where I really had to talk to my brother, because he is like a statistical analyst for the company. And so his job is to, when the coding team comes up with a improvement or just a new feature they want to add, without telling the users, they say there's an update. And they only offer this update to about half or a quarter of their users at random. And when the users update their phones, they get this new feature, but not everyone does. And my brother's job is to monitor obviously the comments and the ratings that will fluctuate from this, or also, and more interestingly, how the user is using the app. Are they using it less? Are they using it more? Are they using the new feature? Are they completely ignoring the new feature? How many hours are they spending on the app? Really those kind of data points that all just get fed back to the company. So if it was really successful and this update, had positive results, they give it to everyone. If it doesn't work, they take it off. So I thought that was an interesting way to keep Strava constantly working the best it can. And then Strava today, it has over 1 million active users with, I think, 200,000 premium users, so you can pay for it. I don't think you need to. The success of this app stems from its constant improvement strategy, like I said, with the updates, loops of prototyping, which is just coming out with those new things, and then tracking the response and implementing it, whether it worked or not. It is truly unique in that no other application creates the team atmosphere that Strava does. And by that, I mean the social media aspect that I was talking about earlier with the competing and beating your friends. And yeah, the goal and competition-oriented features, that's why I really like it. There's a video if you want. Do you skip it?
How long is the video? We don't know.
I don't know. I don't want to give you a wrong answer. It's.
Okay, well, first of all, why don't you click it and see if it goes on?
Oh, okay.
That's our first issue, is whether or not the technology will work.
Oh, it's here, but it's not there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's 1 minute 30.
I don't know if this will. Yeah, you know what? Let's not do it.
There's nothing really in it besides.
Okay.
It's just.
And
looks
let's see what I have to do here. There we go. Okay. Sorry, let me get my goggles on here, sir. This is a little impromptu. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's get our next one up here. So Josie is not here. So let me just get out of that. And we have Mr. Brooks. How about let's get you up here. Okay, so wait a second. Why aren't you? We want to go to slideshow. And are we? We see Northeastern University up here. So we need to toggle the image? Okay. There we go. Okay. So we said it's not an architecture course, but it's okay to just have a tiny bit. Little
more civil engineering, I guess. But hey guys, my name is John. I am a master's student in structural engineering and bachelor's in civil engineering. So needless to say, I am very interested in structures, so I did my project on the evolution of high-rise design. So basically, up until the 1800s, it wasn't really feasible to have a building more than 10 stories. So basically, as they started building them higher and higher, the base needed to hold more weight. So they would use stone, because that's all they had back in the 1800s. So since they had stone, the walls would have to be so thick that you lose a bunch of usable space. So up till the 1890s, there was no buildings that actually exceeded 10 stories. So that building on the right was the tallest building in the country up until 1890, the Chicago Board of Trade. So essentially, in the 1800s, the late 1800s, metropolitan areas were expanding. So a bunch of people wanted their offices in or near the middle of their city. But there wasn't enough space, so the structural engineers and architects realized that this was a significant need. So this was, I guess, the empathy portion of their design. So this led to defining the problem. How are we going to increase that usable space while cutting down on the ground square footage? So their answer is to make the building significantly taller. But how are we going to do that while maintaining structural integrity? You can't just do that with stone. So this guy named Henry Gray in the late 1800s invented the wide flange steel beam. He looked at several different possible cross-sectional shapes and determined that the eye shape works best based on the material properties of the steel and the geometric properties of the eye shape. So through countless iterations of prototyping in shops and testing in the shops, which is basically just applying loads, axial loads, shear loads, an efficient wide flange beam was born. Basically in the early 1900s, Gray Mill in South Bethlehem, which is basically the big place to get steel beams in the 1900s, every developer wanted to get the Bethlehem beam to design their high-rise buildings. So this obviously was a major breakthrough, and it caused a massive building boom. So within 40 years, from 1890 to 1931, the tallest buildings went from tiny little 10 stories to 102, which was the Empire State Building. So that was the tallest building in the country around 1931. But although this was a fantastic feat, architects and structural engineers wanted to innovate. They wanted to create even taller buildings. So how can they do this without the ridiculous amount of hand calculations that were required? So that's where the computer comes in. Structural design for these really tall buildings, they require the use of heavy, complex matrix algebra. So as buildings get taller and taller, there's more and more and more calculations that need to be calculated, almost like at an exponential level. So this is where the computer comes in. So in the 50s, the commercial computers became available to calculate these matrices for us. So this allows us to continue with another iteration of the 5 stages of design. So post-1950, empathy portion, same issue. There's limited ground space, so people wanted to have their offices in the middle of metropolitan areas. To expand on office space, they need to be even taller. So how do we design these tall buildings? How do we do the math without doing it by hand? We now have, I guess, new matrix calculation software that was invented in the 50s to perform the structural analysis of the structure. But when it comes to prototyping, you can't prototype an entire building. That just doesn't make sense. You can't like test an entire building. That's kind of dangerous. So basically we have codes based on past successes and failures that we follow, along with empirical data on each element of the structure. Also, in addition to the codes, engineers actually surprisingly use a lot of intuition. Like for example, serviceability, determining how much deflection you'd have on a building. We have a code book about this big. A single page of that is based on serviceability. So it's really up to the engineer's intuition to figure out how much deflection they would want on a building, how much material they want to use to reduce that deflection. So instead of testing entire buildings, obviously, we're going to take a look at past buildings, determine what's successful, what's not, and we're going to just learn from it. So there's a bunch of design codes that incorporate these successes and failures. So now that we have a computer, we're able to design these tall buildings, we can now focus on some more needs of the client. So basically, we iterate the 5 stages again. So a new need, creating buildings that are environmentally and energy efficient. But how are we going to do this? Basically, engineers thought about using recycled materials, using cheaper yet environmentally efficient materials, incorporating energy-saving measures like solar panels, wind turbines, all that stuff. And so basically LEED certification, that's a great example of that. And I'll show an example on the next slide. So prototyping and testing, I guess we look at each individual component as opposed to looking at an entire building itself. That's kind of how LEED does it. They look at each individual energy saving and environmentally efficient measure to determine how much efficiency an entire building will have. So like an example, solar panels, that's one individual component. And so they can basically turn up to 22% of available energy into electrical power. So basically, if the solar panels are determined efficient for a building, structural engineers are going to need to incorporate loads from the solar panels into their designs. So I guess a great example of this on campus is International Village. They have that nice little garden thing in the center of the building. The materials that they use are cheap, effective, and yeah, so they ended up getting a LEED Gold certified building. Go Northeastern. So essentially, what I'm trying to get across is that in the realm of structural engineering, we kind of use the five stages of design iteratively. So what's going to be the next high-rise design problem? Who knows? Probably change in 20 years, change in 50 years. Who knows?
Okay.
That's it.
Very good.
Thanks.
Let me see what I'm doing here.
Thanks.
Okay. That. That's not it. Sorry, I'm just trying to find your thing here. I've left my glasses on the table again. Now yours is the Sephora, or no? Okay. Okay, sorry, let me find it. Can be able to do structural design. Okay. Structural design, Strava. There we go. Okay. Oh, and you're not PowerPoint, but that's cool. That's cool. We can handle that. Okay, I think we should toggle that on. There we go.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Jane. I wasn't really expecting to have to present this, so please bear with me. As we all know, design thinking is a human-centered, prototype-driven process for innovation that can be applied to product, service, and business design. And of course, that is Tim Brown's definition. And for anyone who doesn't know, Airbnb is a self-described community marketplace for people to list, discover, and book unique accommodations around the world. Whether an apartment for a night, a castle for a week, or a villa for a month, Airbnb connects people to unique travel experiences at any price point in more than 34,000 cities and 192 countries. And just by a show of hands, how many people have used Airbnb before? Oh, nice. So almost everyone. Okay, so step one in design thinking is empathize, which basically just means understanding the audience. So Airbnb's audience is comprised of two market segments with a mutual dependence, and those are the travelers and the hosts. While many companies have a difficult time focusing on more than one target audience, Airbnb's corporate model seamlessly caters to both. They follow a more unusual and creative approach, and the Airbnb team is devoted to getting into the heads of those who use their service in order to fully understand what they're looking for, ultimately defining their challenges through user insight. So step two is define, which is understanding the question. In 2009, Airbnb was at risk of going bankrupt, and they were forced to diagnose their weaknesses in a really quick amount of time. So the company founders went beyond the code and defined what their main problem was on a human level. And by doing this, they engaged in user behavior and identified what their main downfall was. They identified that their main downfall was allowing hosts to upload poor quality images of their apartments onto Airbnb's site. And this was a key moment for Airbnb and essentially launched the startup to billion-dollar success. Step three, ideate, which is brainstorming a vision using multiple approaches. Airbnb's structure encourages all employees to take measured productive risks on behalf of the company. These risks are often attributed to the development of major new features, allowing Airbnb to move quickly and continually jump on new opportunities. And I thought this quote was good to just show how they do this. It's from one of their co-founders. And he said, "We're trying to create an environment where people can see a glimmer of something and basically throw dynamite on it and blow it up to become something bigger than anyone could have ever imagined." Step four, prototype, build a preliminary model. Airbnb does a lot of things
to prototype, but one of their main things, they use a prototyping tool called Invention. And this program allows the team to mock up high-functioning, realistic prototypes without code, and then they can get feedback from their customers before a project goes live, which is obviously very helpful. And then the fifth and final step, which is test, and that's when they measure the impact of their solution. And while Airbnb is surely data-driven, the company doesn't let data dictate all of its decisions. Instead of solely reacting to metrics, the team starts with a creative hypothesis, implements a change, and then reviews how it impacts the business, and then they repeat this process. Individual team members make small bets on new features and then measure if there's a meaningful return on the bet, and if there is payoff, they allocate their energy in that direction. And just overall, design thinking has played a huge role in Airbnb's business development, ultimately propelling the failing startup to a thriving, trusted global empire. On a daily basis, the framework of design thinking continues to help the Airbnb team explore concepts otherwise unattainable through a more traditional lens. Without this mindset, Airbnb would not have been able to rise above their most prominent hurdle, the shift from a search enterprise to a social enterprise. And that's that, short and sweet.
You can just come on over here and just maybe sit in one of these. I'll sit here. Okay, so obviously this portion of the program is going to be a little bit different than in the past, but I thought it would be helpful for us to talk a little bit about, oh, look at this. Oh, it really is a talk show now, right? You know, one of the things that struck me about all the presentations, but especially yours, Teresa, in the beginning, was a wrinkle in the all these companies that are software-based, they all can run analytics, right? They can all test kind of constantly. Airbnb can, Strava can, but the idea that they send out updates only to a small percentage of the users first, and then do comparison analysis, maybe that seems obvious to everybody in here, but that seems like a really good way. If Blackboard had done that, I have a feeling they wouldn't have added all 30,000 features that they have. So, do you know how many of the updates or what percentage of the updates that they make they actually end up not sticking with because there was more negative reaction than positive reaction?
I'm not sure exactly what I guess the exact numbers are, but I know that they do their best to like take a pool. It's not as random as we might think. They try to get like a portion of the older people and then the younger people and try to get as many as they can. I don't know how many ideas go through completely, but before they do the update, they do like check it with like smaller focus groups before they.
Well, and another thing that struck me about Airbnb, and it seems totally true, but so first of all, the dual nature of their clients, that there's hosts and guests. And I know one host very well. I stay at the same place and I talk with this person frequently. And he tells me that it's really, the interface for the hosts is maybe even better than the one for the guests, but that it's very good. It's not like it's geared only to the traveler. But the real game changer, it sounds like, which I didn't know but makes tons of sense, is they must have real strict requirements for photo quality. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I just remember reading that they realized they weren't getting that many people interested, and they realized that it was because the hosts were posting poor quality images. So they actually went to New York and retook the photos themselves and then posted it on the site and got a much more positive response. And they realized obviously they couldn't go to every single host house and take the picture for themselves because that's just really unrealistic. But that's how they realized that was such a big.
I wonder, do you know, and I don't take it the wrong way if you don't know, because this project was a short one, but I would imagine, and I could look into it, but I could imagine that they probably have very specific photo requirements now. In other words, if you've ever uploaded pictures to a site that cares about what it looks like, they're really specific. Do you know what I mean? Like the aspect ratio and maybe saturation. There might be a whole bunch of, they may have their own filters that
Yeah, I
bring
think
your
people do
photos up to speed, because it looks like a curated magazine when you go to Airbnb's website. It doesn't look like a random collection of some photos that are too pale, some that are really dark. Do you know what I mean? The way maybe your friend's Facebook feed might look. You know?
Yeah, I don't think they let images get uploaded if they're not up to like certain.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Again, that's not the most obvious thing for a room rental operation. You know, you might go into this thinking, well, it's all about price. This is just a price comparison thing. That's the only function. That's the only reason I'm using it. But the truth is, I think more of us are comfortable using it because it looks hotel quality in terms of the images, as opposed to slumming quality. And I've stayed, by the way, at a full range of Airbnbs from like $49 a night, kind of rough, up to $300 a night, much nicer. But in other words, the graphics conveyed a quality across the board, irrespective of price, which is interesting. So, John, in your presentation, which I thought was great for a couple of reasons. One, because it got at the cyclical nature of this, that you don't just go through the design thinking process once. A couple of things that struck me, though, about architects and engineers traditionally look at the problem to be solved quite differently. That's why we have to work together, because we look, sometimes architects notoriously don't look at some of the more practical drivers as assiduously as engineers do. But your point about testing, and you say it is unrealistic to fully prototype and test a whole building. That's true. But we do actually prototype and test building segments, and we also do now, in the age of computing, tremendously sophisticated three-dimensional models that are super predictive, which is interesting. In other words, in a way, you can structurally prototype a building way more than you ever could before.
50s or whatever.
You just had to massively over-design it.
Right, exactly.
So, and another thing that's interesting about high-rise buildings, and by the way, I grew up in Chicago, so it's like the birthplace of this whole enterprise. And if you ever go to Chicago, there's a building called the Monadnock Building. You probably know of it, but it's sort of the tallest building that they ever built that was completely self-supporting masonry. It didn't have it's no steel at all, and as a result, the walls at the base of this 11-story building are 14 feet thick, I think. In other words, the walls supporting the load are unbelievably thick because they needed to be, as you said, as you grow. So this is like an example of the pain point.
Yeah.
Okay? It's actually a lovely building, but it's an example of, from a real estate development standpoint, the pain point, which is, wait a second, we don't get to rent all the bricks. We only get to rent the space between the bricks, and that space has gotten insanely small.
Right.
So, and by the way, our windows have unbelievably deep frames, like 11 feet. So it was kind of difficult to look out of.
Yeah.
So when you guys, and I'm asking the whole class here because I want to get you guys involved too. When you started this enterprise, had you thought much about design thinking? Had you been exposed to it at all previously? Yes? Just one? So how do you imagine, now that you've kind of assessed a very designed thing in each of these cases, yours is a bit more general, a bit more of a generic thing, but in your case it's both very, very specific. And our missing guest did the Sephora makeup business. You've been to the Sephora, it's not called makeup, what is it called? Cosmetic stores, and how they completely transformed the way you get taught how to apply all this stuff. When you're a young person, the first time you start buying cosmetics and things like this, it's all super expensive, and you have to buy it, and what if it doesn't look right or whatever? So this was a way about how to engage the consumer in learning about it so you could sort of try first and buy later, rather than buy first and try later, which it turned out not to be a very good plan. But can you guys imagine using this kind of approach in your academic lives or subsequently in your professional lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense because it is so human driven, and obviously we're all humans, and everything we do is to like cater to our needs. So I think it's very relevant.
Yeah, you know, I think it is. I think you're right. And what the big eye opener for me, and even as somebody who was trained as an architect, the big eye opener about looking at the world through this lens is how often we are solving the wrong problem. No matter how good we are at what we do, you know, if I thought that the problem was, well, we just need stronger bricks, you know, that would not be actually the only solution. And it would not have yielded. You remember Henry Ford saying, if I'd asked my customers, they said they needed a faster horse. And that would not have led in the direction that he went. And so I find that to be, no matter what field you're in, making sure that you understand what the real problem is, what the real pain point is, what the real issue is. You know, I'm already lining up the people for next semester, and a few more of them are architects this time, and they'll tell you almost every time that they end up helping their clients identify the problem, and that adds as much value as any sophistication on their part does in terms of taste or composition.
I was really surprised when I was researching the guy who created Strava that he was just like, he was off the team in college, and
Right.
he was sad he wasn't on a team anymore, and that was just like a very personal issue.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
so many people could relate to that, because like I ran in high school, then I got to college and became lazy, and like it was just incredible that like a problem he like personally had relates to so many people, and so that whole like the first step and like why it was so effective was just because it was like a simple problem that everyone has.
Now, you know, when it comes to Strava, this is really interesting because I'm part of the user base. And I don't use it for running because my joints are too fragile at this point. But I do use it for bike riding. And the real key moment came not from Strava, but from the people who make they're now a few competitors for the things to put your smartphone on your handlebars. How many of you have that? Any of you have that? Okay, you're young and you can go to the Marino Center. But it's really, really great because then it puts the whole kind of mapping, and
You're watching where you're going.
you're watching all the, it's like a speedometer, and I don't actually, I think I have one friend on it through Facebook, but I need to build a team, absolutely. I mean, that is, you know, solving a problem in a way that until he articulated it, you didn't know you had.
I mean, I knew I had it, I just didn't know what I was going to do about it, because
Right.
I don't have time to join a team.
Right.
But, like having a digital one is definitely.
Well, you had translated it into I'm lazy and slothful and self-loathing, always our first choice,
Yeah.
I admit. But, but in fact, previously you'd had this engine that helped drive your career or your sports, and I think that's very cool. Teasing that stuff out is what a method like design thinking can provide, I think. In other words, when we see things that we think are really innovative and cool, and I will say some of the presentations that you guys did weren't necessarily specific enough, and therefore that you didn't identify a specific thing that was that was driving decisions. Like this thing about finding a way to digitally recreate the feeling of competition when I'm by myself. That's a pretty specific thing. Then you can get specific answers. You know, sometimes people, you know, if they highlight something that we're all super familiar with, they just talk about how it was successful. And you sort of left, and in a way that's the wrong lesson. The idea that, well, there's some magic that happens from someone who is quote unquote creative. I'm not, but you know, some creative person. When in fact it's a method. It's a method not unlike structural analysis. I mean, it's not as quantitative, but it's just as specific. So anyway, I hope that is helpful to you guys. And for those of you who haven't submitted your final projects yet, you got some free samples. You know, one of the things that makes a good PowerPoint presentation, by the way, and I got questions about this from a few people, is there's an inherent conflict when you have to hand in a PowerPoint presentation. It's just like when, as a company, we have to leave one behind for investors as a data-filled document. Can anybody tell me what is the inherent structural conflict? Yes? Yes, there's one thing that's to be presented by you as a human, in which case you can do a Steve Jobs-like presentation that just has a killer image, so the people are looking at the image and they're trying to imagine themselves in the image, or what does that image mean, or why is that sunburst exploding, or whatever, and then you come in for the kill with the content. But unfortunately, if you have to leave it behind and you just leave a slide deck that has a picture of a rising sun, another one of a happy child, another one of a fast car, your potential investor is left thinking that you're completely nuts. So a couple ways to deal with this. One is to make 2 decks. And in our business, we've been told that's probably the best thing to do, which is to have the one that I present, and then if they insist that I leave one behind, and they often do, I just leave behind a different one with more words. Because PowerPoint isn't intended to be Excel or Microsoft Word. If you wanted a white paper, I'll write your white paper, which will have footnotes and make a very, very compelling, clear argument. If you want a PowerPoint presentation, it's like visual backdrop to a verbal presentation. So the hook is the compromise position if you have to submit something like this, but may be called up on stage to present it. And you saw some that had an awful lot of written words because they were handing in an assignment, not knowing that it was going to be primarily presented in verbal. So the answer to that is to use the notes section. Most of these programs, certainly PowerPoint, has a whole section that the audience doesn't see. They might just see the sunburst, but you have some reminders. Oh, right, what am I talking about? And you can have it written down in narrative form, you can have it written in a bulleted list, but it's better to not, and this is slightly off the course, but this is life advice, because your PowerPoint is central to your life. Don't do what most of your professors do, which is to give you PowerPoints that have 19 bullet points, or then they read from the entire PowerPoint. I'm not criticizing anyone on stage today because they were preparing for the one that you submit. But if you're handing in something that's to be read, that's one problem. And if you're presenting something verbally, that's another problem. And so I encourage you to be aware of that. And if you can only do one file, put the extensive verbal part in the notes section and only have a few keywords that you might want to have people looking at. Okay. All right. I think we're good. Thank you all very much for this. And our final class is on Monday with President Aoun, and I think it's going to be great. Till then, and make sure you get your final project in today. Today's the last day.